right, good afternoon, NCIA members and supporters. Welcome to another edition of NCIA's Industry Essentials Educational Webinar Series, our new digital platform featuring a variety of programs to provide you timely, engaging, and essential education when and where you need it most. My name is Brian Gilbert, the events manager here at NCIA, and I'm very excited to intro this fantastic learning opportunity for you all this afternoon. We have a great session lined up as our State Regulations Committee presents a discussion on a number of crucial topics if you are working within or thinking of entering the burgeoning cannabis market in the Prairie State. If you're just joining us, please note that we will be conducting a moderated Q&A session at the conclusion of the presentation. So if you have any questions for the panelists, please don't hesitate to pose them at any time by either using the Q&A feature available along the bottom toolbar. This will allow our panelists to answer questions in real time throughout the presentation, or by sending them as a message inside the chat room to all panelists or everyone in the meeting, and our team will compile them for discussion. Additionally, use the last few moments before our presentation begins to participate in the icebreaker poll, and stay on the lookout throughout the session for prompts from our panel, as we'll be requesting responses to additional surveys to help guide their conversation. Finally, a special thank you to the sponsor of this afternoon's webinar, Illinois Equity Staffing. They were originally slotted to support our Midwest-based networking events scheduled throughout the summer, but adjusted as we all have during these trying times, and are now lending their support to our online educational content. Thank you again. Now, on to our regularly scheduled programming. This afternoon, we have the third edition of our NCIA Committee Insights series, showcasing content produced in partnership with one of our 13 member-led committees. Today's session will be hosted by our State Regulations Committee and feature an enlightening conversation regarding what Illinois is doing well and where some gaps still exist, such as in their social equity program. A huge thank you to all of our attendees, and a special shout out to the NCIA members for joining us this afternoon. And with that, please enjoy today's session entitled NCIA Committee Insights, Illinois Market, What's Happening and What's Next, being moderated by Maureen McNamara, founder and chief facilitator at longtime NCIA supporter, Cannabis Trainers. Take it away, Maureen.
Al, we're so glad each of you are here. You made a great decision to dig into this detail, and I can tell from the comments and chats that many of you are in Illinois and from the Midwest, but we look forward to sharing this information with everybody. And to kick it off, I'm going to welcome my teammate Greg to start.
Thank you, Maureen. My first interaction with the Illinois cannabis market actually came through my cousin, who has 3 small triplets, and at 37 was diagnosed with breast cancer in both breasts. She went to the traditional market to get some cannabis to aid with her side effects from the cancer treatment, and reached out to me to help her try to obtain some medical cannabis that would be tested, more catered to her conditions. And I helped her look into it, and she was never able to get a medical card. When you have 3 little triplets at home, it's hard to find any free time. In addition, she works full time. And now today, because of adult use, she's able to obtain that tested cannabis to help her with her conditions. My name is Greg Huffaker, and I'm here today to tell you more about that Illinois market. I'm the Director of Client Services at Can Advisors and a licensed attorney, and I'm glad you're all joining us today. Margo?
Hello, my name is Margo Brunner. I have the honor of serving as a member of the Minority Cannabis Business Association Board of Directors. I am a founding member of National Expungement Week and the owner of Perpetual Harvest Sustainable Solutions. We offer government relations and social good consulting. Next up, Michael.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Cooper. I'm the current chair of the State Regulations Committee, which is hosting this event, and I'm also the co-chair of the NCIA Policy Council. In my day job, I'm the co-founder and managing member of Madison J Solutions. We're a strategic regulatory consulting firm that helps operators and ancillaries in the adult use and hemp CBD markets identify and mitigate regulatory risk, developing long-range plans tailored to their risk tolerances to thrive in these highly regulated spaces. Maureen? Hey everyone, I think we're having a little technical difficulty.
All right, I am back. Welcome, everybody. My name is Maureen McNamara, and training has been my focus and passion since the 1900s. Our signature program is designed to inspire dispensary agents to know the rules and endeavor to always play by them. Its signature class is called Sell Smart, and we teach that all over the country. Now, Illinois is my old stomping ground. I lived there all the way back in the 90s, and it is a delight to share this content with you today. Let's go to our next slide and we'll take a look at our learning objectives. This is what we're going to share with you, insights. And although you are muted, we definitely want to hear from you. So as Brian mentioned, there's a couple places that can occur. As we move through today's content, join us in the Q&A or the chat feature. And both of those will be able to allow you to interact directly with us because that's important for us. So we'll talk about the rules and how Illinois is very different, the different types of license types. And I know that some of you joining us right now have your applications in and you're ready to get that winning heads up that you indeed did get a license. We'll talk about social equity and some interesting differences in the Illinois market as well. We'll also talk about social consumption. All right, now we've got a poll. We'd love to have some information from you. So get ready and let's launch our first poll of the series. And that poll should be coming up any second because we want to know kind of what is your status with doing business in Illinois. All right, well, jump with me over into the chat window if you would. And in the chat window, I'd love for you to write in, are you currently doing business in Illinois? Have you applied and you're waiting to hear back? Are you currently looking at possibilities to get involved? So go ahead over to the chat feature. Oh, we've got a poll up as well. So if that feels easy, you can go ahead and answer it there. Good, Jamie. Oh, hello, Jamie. You're looking to expand your business. Peyton, you're exploring possibilities. Good. Everyone else, feel free to jump into that poll feature. Chris, I like it. Yes, all of that's what's happening for you. All right, final moments then to answer that poll. We'll go ahead and close that poll. Yeah, you're here to learn. Wonderful. Karen, I like it. Speak positively. You're in the process of winning a license. All right, sweet. So for the majority of people joining us live, you're looking to get involved. You're in that exploratory phase. So just 13 of you have your applications in and 31 already doing business. Wonderful. Jerome is as well. I like that. All right, sweet. Good. That gives us a good idea of where you are. Now, for those of you that are already doing in business in Illinois, as we move to the next slide, you'll know why it is so unique there in Illinois. Greg, tell us more.
Hey, this is Michael. I'll take that one.
Yeah, you take that one, Michael.
Greg will jump in. So look, Illinois is a fascinating first in market creation. It's the first state to create a market for regulated adult use cannabis for sale through the legislature as opposed to through a direct voter initiative. Now, in our estimation, it's likely to be a recurring trend as the legalization movement continues to strengthen. Now, before Illinois, these tended to be grassroots initiatives. They weren't driven by elected officials, and in particular, in the early years of the movement, they weren't even necessarily supported by those elected officials. As an aside, that's one reason why groups like the NCIA have been so important to the story of reform and why we're proud to be members. Now, that had an impact on the type of law that was created, relatively concise ballot initiatives to be digestible by the voting public. These outline the broad contours and key points of the newly legalized markets, but they didn't get into the level of detail that would create a mammoth 100-plus page bill. After the initiatives were passed, the markets were created, it largely fell to regulators, subject matter experts tasked with overseeing the markets, to draft functional rules to flesh out the details and to make the marketplaces work, or, I suppose, face the wrath of the voters who had called for cannabis reform. Now, as I mentioned at the outset, Illinois' process was different, and its reform law is different as a result. In Illinois, adult use isn't the product of a ballot initiative, but as everyone who's operating there knows well, the product of a legislative process and compromise. And compromise is a key word. There are a number of different policy considerations that go into cannabis reform and different approaches to reform that can express different priorities. As you'll expect, we'll be discussing some of those today. Now, as a result of that legislative negotiation, we have a far more detailed and granular piece of enacting legislation for Illinois' cannabis program than you would expect to see from a ballot initiative. Now, that doesn't mean that regulators like the IDFPR, the Department of Agriculture, won't be writing detailed rules. They've already released certain regulations and more will come. It simply means that many key decisions have already been made at the legislative level. It's also worth noting that this is a very common model of regulation in complex areas. Frequently, the broad contours of a program will be written into law by legislators, but the detailed work of effectuating the goals of legislation are often left to regulators who are deemed best positioned to create and update those rules as necessary, bringing their subject matter expertise to bear. There's actually an entire field of law, admin law, about the scope and limits of that authority that's likely on the minds of every lawyer participating on the call today.
Hey, Michael. Yeah, as another lawyer on the call, and so everybody knows, Michael and I have had a lot of fun chit-chatting about this. And it's going to be fascinating to see in that world of administrative law for all the lawyers associated with what's going to happen. But for all the non-lawyers, I think you're interested what this all means for you. And, you know, comparing it to other states, I think is a great way to think about this. And other states, as we've heard from Michael, where it's generally brought on by the ballot box and then really fleshed out by the government at the regulatory level. Here we're seeing that fleshing out at the statutory level, which means some stuff is more static than we're used to in other states because it's harder to change something from the legislature than something from the regulations. But the other side is those regulations that fill in those gaps, especially for the dispensaries, really aren't for the most part written yet. So you're going to need to plan to be agile and have changes as these regulations come out and tweak. For current operators, this shouldn't feel like anything new. You know, we even had an overhaul of the rules here in Colorado that went into effect at the beginning of this year. So, you know, again, for the non-lawyers, thing to keep in mind is it's not all set in stone, but some things are. So you're gonna anticipate some change. Okay. Now I'd love to tell you all more about the different license types we have here and sort of, you know, the general buckets we're operating in. So the medical program came into effect in 2013. It was the 20th state to have a medical program. And there are currently 55 dispensing and then 20 cultivation licenses in that medical program. Then in 2015, we saw the first actual sales to patients in those different types of medical facilities. So those medical facilities formed the first group here, number 2, of available to existing licenses, the types of new licenses that you can get. Those are specifically the Early Approval Adult Use Cultivation Center, which allows those medical cultivation licensees to now also cultivate for adult use. And then 2 types of dispensing organization license. One being the Early Approval Adult Use Dispensing Organization License, which is basically for those who have been in states like Colorado and California that used to have a medical counter and then added an adult use counter. It's the same thing now. And then the third option is the Early Approval Adult Use Dispensing Organization at a secondary site. Basically, some of those medical dispensaries have applied for a new secondary location to serve adult use exclusively.
Hey, Greg,
The third group,
may I,
yeah.
because we're talking about that adult use dispensaries and how the former medical dispensaries, let's do a quick question to our live listeners. Join us in the chat window. And as Greg continues to go through the licenses, the adult use dispensaries, who among you that is with us has been to an adult use dispensary in Illinois? Go ahead over to the chat feature. Let us know if you've already been into. Jerome, yep, great. Good, lots of yeses. Maybe that's not yet. Maybe it's on your, as soon as you feel safe out in the world. Okay, great. Brian, Carrie, Tom, Allison, Jackie, a lot of people have already been to those adult use dispensaries. Fabulous. So back to you, Greg. Just Medical.
Great.
Thanks, John.
And that did give me a chance to look at a Q&A that was submitted. And I want to let you guys know, Vermont and DC do both have grow and give away, as we like to call it, states. And Vermont was technically the first state to legalize adult use cannabis. However, you cannot sell it or buy it, and there's no tax money associated with it. So we consider that really to be a stepping stone, since that essentially does nothing to, eliminate the traditional market, nor does it do anything to, help with tax revenues, which we know states are particularly interested in the situation right now. So back to those, the ones that were accepted earlier this year. So on January 2nd, the adult use dispensing organization licenses were due at noon. And basically those are for people who are not previously medical operators in the state of Illinois to be able to open up a dispensary. We'll be talking in a second about when we're expected to hear about those. And then just a couple weeks ago on April 30th, the deadline was for 3 other types of adult use license. The first is a craft grower license. That is a cultivation facility that can start with 5,000 square feet of canopy and is able in 2 phases in the future to increase that. They're also able to extract and infuse. The second type of license is an infuser organization, or often just referred to as an infuser legally in the rules. That is someone who can take cannabis flower or cannabis extract and infuse it, incorporate it into a product for sale. The third group is the transportation organizations or transporters. The licenses for craft grower and infuser allow you to transport a certain distance depending on your county size. And for all those that are going to be around Chicago, that limit that you can transport is 2,000 feet, which is not the distance from one side of your facility to the other. So obtaining a transporter license is necessary, or using a third party that has a transporter license is needed. Okay, so those are the ones that were accepted in early 2020. Let's talk about this fourth group of those are not yet available. So in the future, we are going to see an adult use cultivation center license become available, which will, from the get-go, allow for a larger amount of canopy than the current craft grower ones that just closed. And the second not yet available license is known as the processing organization or processor license. That fits into the same category as the cultivation, and we'll talk in a minute about when those are sort of going to hit. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that they're also giving out 8 community college program licenses to interact at a very different level. I won't bore everybody here too much with the history around giving licenses to colleges, but let me just say it's complicated and fraught, and I'm not sure that they'll be able to, get all 8 out initially. Next slide, please.
Greg
So,
great.
Yeah. So let's put all of these different things and licenses I was just talking about in a little bit of context of a timeline. This is going to be a little bit boring at times. I'll just give you guys a heads up about that right now, but we'll sum it up in the end. So I hope I don't lose too many people. So, I already said back in 2013 is when the medical program started. And in 2015, sales started. June 25th, 2019, so coming up on a year ago, the governor signed HB 1438. That completely overhauled the existing cannabis laws that were just around medical to add all the stuff we're talking about today in. On August 22nd, 2019, the first early approval licenses were granted. That second group I talked about above. So they were giving those people lead time to get set up by granting those in August. And indeed, we saw it work because on January 1st, we all know the adult use dispensing organizations opened, only the early approval ones, of course. The next day on January 2nd is when that wave 1 of the independent adult use dispensaries, there'll be 75 given out in this round, closed. And I said April 30th was then when we saw, just a couple weeks ago, wave 1 of craft grower for up to 40 licenses, for infuser up to 40 licenses, and transportation, which is unlimited, all closed. Now, the way transport works, just as a quick aside for those interested, you have to get a score of at least 75% and then you get one. So it's not just like, you fill out a form and you become one. You have to show that you're going to be able to be a good transporter, and then you get a license. Okay, so that's all the things in the past. Now let's look at going forward. In the near future now here, IDFPR has already missed their wave 1 announcement for dispensing. And the governor basically gave them a pass through executive order. So since that didn't happen May 1st, I expect to see it sometime in the next month. Who knows? The date for the 3 that just got turned in a couple weeks ago, it got extended twice the deadline, is technically July 1st. I think it is unlikely that they're going to be able to hit that statutory date just due to the volume of reading that lies ahead of them and the number of hours in between then and now. So we'll just have to see. So it'll be an interesting summer to watch for all of those announcements, and inevitably in any process, there will likely be appeals afterwards and articles about all that stuff. So keeping an eye on the news this summer is going to be a good idea if you're interested in getting into the market. Looking to the fall now, in September, we're going to see the announcement of those 8 community college program licenses. It's slated for September 1st. We'll see if they hit that one or not. Then we move into this murkier area that after in the fall, basically the 2 regulatory agencies, the IDFPR for dispensaries and the Department of Agriculture for the other license types, are going to be able to have the ability to open up for more licenses. So we're going to see that the cultivation center, those big cultivation centers for adult use, those 30 licenses will become available July 1st of 2021. For the total of 110 dispensaries that are going out, not the early approval medical add-ons, but the independent ones. That has to happen by December 21st, 2021. And the agencies have some variability and choice when they're going to implement that. I wouldn't be surprised if it's Q3 or Q4 of 2020. In addition to that December 21st, 2021 date, there's the additional 60 craft growers and the additional 60 infusers that are in the same situation as the dispensaries. It's just Department of Ag instead of IDFPR. So keeping an eye out for this summer's news will help tell you about when those wave 2 of licensing is going to be coming up in the fall, winter, or maybe even the following spring. It depends. And then after January 1st, 2022, so basically in 2 years, a little bit less, the Department of Agriculture has the ability to open up the number of craft growers. So basically, craft grower wave 1 done, wave 2 coming soon, cultivation center separately coming up next summer. And then in 2022, they can decide to raise the craft grower again for a wave 3 or wave 4 of that. That also is the time that they can open those separate processors up. That's a standalone that doesn't have the growing element of a craft grower. Okay, so now circling back and trying to make this interesting again and get back to the fun parts. What does this mean for you? If you just put in an application, it means you're going to be checking your email all summer. If you change your email, if you change your phone number, please immediately let the state know so they can get in contact with you. And you're just keeping a close eye. For those folks that are planning on getting in the market, interested in the future, you also want to keep an eye on that. You want to be, hear that ear to the road to hear what's coming up and trying to stay ahead of it and do what you can to prepare, because we might have very quick, short notice for that wave 2 opening. Now, Chuck asked how many cultivators are active right now. There's the 20 medical cultivation centers of whom they are allowed to cultivate and sell to their adult use within their supply chain. And it's 40 licenses that are going to come out sometime this summer for those craft grows. I hope that answers your question, Chuck. And at this point, I believe we are heading into another poll. Is that right,
It's
Maureen?
true. Yes, I'd love to hear from everybody. It's quiz time. So Illinois, we want to know, how many people's records did Illinois expunge for minor cannabis charges? Go ahead and put your guesses in. Was it absolutely none? Was it 750, 3,900, or 11,000? So, let's see if anyone guesses. The correct answer is available as one of the options. So it's not a mean quiz. It's going to be an accurate one. And I can't wait to see how many of you know what the answer to this one is as we bridge into our next topic about social equity. All right, so just more 5 seconds. If using the poll isn't possible, you can feel free to chat your answer in the chat window. Some of you are chatting in your answers. The rest of you are in the poll. Let's go ahead and close that poll, but to add some drama to the excitement, we're not going to reveal the results. Oh, there they are. Okay. Oh, it was a quick C. Well, let's keep a little mystery and let you know what the results are for you in just a moment there. All right, so that as we talk about expungement, that brings us to social equity. And let me just check. We did have a speaker issue, so let's just see if Margot's back with us and give that a quick moment. If not, we will get her back in just a second. Yeah, Greg, let's give a little bit of content here, and then as soon as we've got Margot back, we'll invite her to share her wisdom.
Absolutely. And boy, don't we all live in funny times, right? And, the best laid plans, you never know what's going to happen once with the internet, once we all go live. So I'm going to get going on this, helping out for Margot, and when she's able to hop back in, I will shut up. So the social equity program in Illinois has 3 big aspects of it. The first one is ownership. Now, learning from some other states in giving preferences, what they decided to do here in Illinois is to give a big bump, about 20% of the total application points, to companies that are at least 51% social equity applicants. There's basically 3 big buckets that makes you a social equity applicant. The first is if you or a family member were arrested for cannabis possession. Margot is far more expert in the minutiae and details of what exactly qualifies and not, but lots of people do is the important thing to know. And the second category is if you have lived in a disproportionately impacted area. And they determine those based on history of arrests, for cannabis being really heavily impacting some communities. And then the third category to be a social equity applicant is if you have at least 10 employees and at least 51% of them are one of those 2 buckets. So
wonderful. Greg, thanks for giving us that overview. We do have Margot back in the mix with us. So Margot, we were able to have Greg give us the quick overview. We'd love to add your voice to the mix about this. And to give you a heads up, we did launch that poll, but we have yet to share the results. So let us know when you'd like to let everyone know which answer was correct. Okay, thanks, Margot.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, technology, boy. I saw that Greg was giving it a great go, so I'll just do the beginning and the end because I'm sure he touched on a few of the points. But as it relates to social equity, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Of all the states, Illinois definitely is a benchmark for equity, and it is hands down the best program in the Midwest. This program was very eagerly anticipated. A key factor is that they took an equity day one approach, using equity as a forethought in policy. And Greg was giving the breakdown as to, what it means to be a social equity operator. And basically they address equity in 3 tiers, which will be ownership, employment. I think that's where, if I'm not mistaken, where Greg was handing off in reference to some of the MSOs that have been allowed to also qualify for social equity status by having 10 or more full-time employees. And being that cannabis has been deemed an essential service, I have seen a great number of existing operators posting on LinkedIn, and they appear to be actively hiring for some positions in the Illinois market. The goal is community impact, to use businesses as incubators and workforce development programs to make the cannabis industry a highly inclusive force for job creation. Last but not least is expungement. Note, this is very low level possession. If you've been convicted of a cannabis related crime involving 30 grams or less that was not connected to a violent offense, you are eligible for expungement. I didn't see the poll.
Well, let's
Let me
actually
follow
launch those answers now if we could, so
Yes,
everyone can see how they did.
They did really well. 11,000 is the correct answer. At the stroke of midnight on December 31st, just before legalization of recreational cannabis, 11,000 people had their records expunged. It was that easy. The crimes were removed from their records.
And I just want to
They
acknowledge, Margot, that was no effort on anyone who had a minor cannabis offense. They didn't have to fill out an application, hire a lawyer. It was just expunged. Is that right?
No, it is a great example of tech and policy coming together for good. It just like you stated, it was automatic. Now from this point forward, it will not show up on any background check. It won't be considered any hiring decision, and they didn't have to do anything.
That's fantastic. Kudos to Illinois for that.
Absolutely. There's a lot of ambiguity in the industry at large, but what we do know is that 75 licenses will be awarded. The original timeline has obviously been disrupted. In the meantime, people can use this extension time to tweak application and pay special attention to SOPs regarding sanitation or new community benefits agreements, and possibly even considering consolidation with other equity applicants. In the Illinois policy allowed 6 months to acquire real estate after a license is issued. And that was given to allow the setup for supply chain and to acquire real estate. But now there are a lot of questions in the balance. You know, will any of the licensees, in particular equity licensees, be positioned to open? Because the burn rate is extremely high, even under normal circumstances. Will capitalization requirements become more stringent from the investment community? Will you be able to turn a profit in 2021, possibly late 2021, 22? And also the consideration, will tech and algorithms capture what the established purchase patterns are now? And from this point, only time can tell.
Thank you, Margot. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
And
Yeah.
I do see some of the chat features in there. When we think about what states are or are not doing in the world of social equity, it sounds like Illinois has got, from the very beginning, created some good policies here. Of course, there's always more work to do. So speaking about what's unique about Illinois, Michael.
Thanks, Maureen. So one topic that is somewhat unique here is advertising. It's an area that's regulated in all mature markets, and advertising is one of the most important tools available to any consumer business. It's obviously especially important to cannabis brands. One of the key questions you need to answer, whether in Illinois or any other market, is why my product and not X's product? Now, something that we spend a lot of time talking to folks about in the industry is a related question. How is a consumer going to know to purchase my product and not X's product, particularly given the constraints of regulation around marketing, which is your opportunity to reach consumers before they arrive at retail, as well as packaging and labeling, which is the key opportunity to reach consumers at retail. Now, marketing is particularly important for those who are contemplating becoming multi-state brands in the future, who are multi-state operators today. If you're investing significant time and resources to create certain brand elements, items that consumers associate with your products when they see them, you want to make sure that it works across your target markets. So what are some notable features of Illinois' advertising law for adult use cannabis that may look different than those that are familiar to operators around the country? For one thing, Illinois has a ban on the promotion of overconsumption of cannabis. That's a restriction that appears in some states, but not others. So while that may be familiar to, say, someone coming and tuning in, I believe there was someone in Nevada who came in the chat feature earlier, it's going to be a familiar restriction to them. There are many markets that, unlike Nevada, don't have an explicit restriction on promotion that promotes overconsumption. Now that's
So, Michael,
oh, I'm sorry, Maureen.
that's an interesting one because, like you mentioned, the rules are different in every state, but
Yep.
how would that be gauged? Do you have a sense of?
Sure. It's a great question. And at the end of the day, overconsumption is going to be, for the foreseeable future, a subjective question. Now, there could be regulations issued in the future. At the beginning of this, I was talking about subject matter expert regulators weighing in and providing additional, more granular guidance. That could happen on what it means to promote something in a manner involving overconsumption. But at the end of the day, overconsumption, I think, is a good example of something that's in the eye of the beholder. And for what it's worth, it's something that may look different to a longtime industry veteran than it may to someone who's a regulator who's less familiar with this industry. And it's something that you really need to be proactive and think through. How is this going to be received? How is it going to be received by a regulatory audience? Frankly, how is it going to be received by whatever subject matter expert is doing the regulatory due diligence on your company years down the road if you look to take an investment from a more established company? Because at the end of the day, overconsumption, even if you create a definition for it, is still going to be subjective. There's going to be something that's the marginal case where it looks like overconsumption to one person and not to another. So that's where I think it's essential to have a plan and an explanation and a narrative for how you tried to create something that didn't implicate overconsumption.
Yeah, thank you. And that's one of the challenges, of course, of interpreting rules is the subjectivity. And I would throw down the challenge to play conservative when it comes to that.
Sure. And look, we just got a great question from one of the attendees who asked, well, is this something that could lead to courts limiting the scope of that provision? And I think the answer is it's going to be viable to have an overconsumption prohibition. That said, it is certainly the case that a court might at some point, someone will challenge a fine and a court might say, no, this isn't truly the promotion of overconsumption. But even in that scenario, which requires somebody challenging this, taking it to court, et cetera, getting a written decision, I would not be surprised if the test applied by the court was still something that led to confusion in the future. For all the lawyers on the call, Greg and I were playing this game earlier. Courts tend to create multi-factor tests to evaluate something. I think you'll still wind up in a similar position, although there may be certain things that are clarified as okay or not okay. So it's a great question. Now, it is worth pointing out that this prohibition on overconsumption does have an analog. It's a relatively common restriction in the world of alcohol. So it's not as though there's nowhere to turn to with some experience in avoiding promotion of overconsumption of an intoxicant. But what I would say is it's really important as you think about these issues to think about sort of the core elements of your brand. Who are the consumers for your product? What's the story that you're telling about the role that your product plays in their life? There are going to be different answers to that. The closer that it gets to something that could be construed as overconsumption, you want to be thoughtful of that if you're looking at this market. Now, I want to give another example. There's also a ban on actual consumption in advertising. So you can't have imagery of the actual consumption of cannabis or cannabis products. Now, that's particularly notable for people who want to use multi-state art or use existing art in Illinois. It's not to say that there aren't other markets that have a similar restriction. Again, Nevada does. It has this very restriction. But the reason why we wanted to flag this one is it's a good example of a restriction that presumably isn't all that difficult for savvy operators to navigate once they know about it. But it's very easy to run afoul of if you fail to plan ahead. And so, for example, you might have someone, one of the folks who said, hey, we're considering expanding into Illinois. If you are in another state now and you're considering expanding into Illinois, you're doing a new set of promotional shots, things like that, redesign of your brand in your home market, this is something that's worth thinking about today.
Wonderful. And I want to invite everybody, we've got one more topic to discuss with Michael at the helm, social consumption, but we'll be getting ready for your Q&A. So join us either in the Q&A section or in the chat window, questions we may answer for you. I'd actually love everyone to go back to the chat window, because something we've probably been missing for the last couple of months is the old puff, puff, pass. And that doesn't really fit with quarantining right now. And so it might be something people are missing. As Michael and I begin to engage in this conversation, and Michael shares some wisdom, I'd love for each of you with us live right now, what do you envision social consumption to be like moving forward in the midst of COVID and post-COVID? So if you've got some ideas on what you think that's going to be or how it's going to change, we welcome you to pop that into the chat window. So Michael, tell us about social consumption in Illinois.
Sure. Social consumption is a fascinating subset of cannabis regulation around the country, and that includes Illinois. So in a number of the early adult use markets, the emphasis was on creating pathways to get regulated, tested, and taxed cannabis to consumers. What became apparent is that many consumers wanted somewhere to enjoy these products in a communal setting, which goes back to the early roots of cannabis, exactly what you were referencing, Maureen. That's led to an increasing discussion of how to make social consumption licensing work in the context of adult use for Cannabis 2.0 states. So how did Illinois approach social consumption? Illinois' cannabis legislation created an elective process by which a unit of local government can elect to permit social consumption within its borders. The first locality that approved a social consumption venue was in Springfield, Illinois. The first locality that approved that, I should say, in Illinois. Now, that's not going to be the only place that you see social consumption in Illinois in the future. Other jurisdictions were evaluating their adult use options earlier this year. But as you can imagine, COVID-19 has created a significant impact here. First, there's the simple fact that there are some very pressing matters before local governments that have limited bandwidth to address topics, even ones that are as important as cannabis regulation. It's particularly so because local governments have been forced to ramp their budgets down on the cost side to deal with the fallout of COVID-19. They've had to spend to prepare for COVID-19, just as the revenue side is taking a hit because tax bases take a hit as the economy struggles. Now, I do want to give a quick shout out here. There was actually a very interesting article in one of our fellow state regulations committee members, Sean Donahoe, I saw quoted in it talking about, not in Illinois, but in California, localities that are looking at liberalizing, opening up to cannabis in order to secure more tax money. So it's a very interesting thing. This is a dynamic situation, both in Illinois and outside of Illinois. But there's also a challenge that will face any locality looking at adult use social consumption, and that's how you make social consumption feasible in this new era. So given the element of local control, Illinois was always likely to see different models develop within the state on social consumption. As a result of COVID-19, you're likely to see a number of different models develop for social consumption within, of course, the state's broader framework for necessary social distancing. In fact, social consumption cannabis faces challenges that mirror what's going on with on-premise alcohol and food establishments. How do you enforce social distancing? Are people going to want to move around in an establishment like this? And is there a way to configure the layouts to permit social consumption of products while maintaining a healthy social distance? These are real open questions that people are working on. You also have a question in social consumption of cannabis about how you clean the reusable equipment. Can you have reusable equipment like smoking or vaporization devices available? What are the risks associated with various cleaning tools and methods? These are discussions that are happening very actively throughout the industry and within the state. So the upshot of all of this is that social consumption was likely to be a fascinating area of evolution in Illinois, even before COVID-19. Now there is definitely going to be a significant evolution in the model that everyone was considering for social consumption before February or March. Stay tuned, both in Illinois and around the country, to see how that shakes out.
Yeah, there's so much more for us to learn about how to move forward safely and positively. I saw a couple responses come in the chat feature about looking into your crystal ball and how do you anticipate, predict, or see that social consumption can move forward powerfully. Hookah lounges, possibly following those regulations. Right. Well, we have got about 7 minutes to answer your questions, and then we'll do a final wrap up for everybody. So if you've got questions that we haven't yet answered, I'm going to invite my panelists to prowl around onto the Q&A section. We do have a question from Vipal about if we're aware of any limits on out-of-state investing for licenses in Illinois. Any thoughts on that?
Happy to start. So anyone that gets investment, or sorry, anyone who invests and therefore gets equity or even debt terms back for an entity applying or actively licensed in the state of Illinois, you have to go through a principal officer form process, which is getting fingerprints, which is answering questions about your history and background. Assuming you get through that process, there's not a further restriction if you are, a U.S. citizen in investing in these groups. I say U.S. citizen not from a place of knowing that's absolutely a requirement, as much as generally we find that to be a, part of this whole thing, and kind of like, I could be wrong about that, basically, is what I'm getting at. But anyway, yes, there is outside investment. However, because of the social equity program and that extra 20% of points for application, it is very likely that you will be either a minority owner, or that you'd need to use that third route of social equity, where you're already identifying and paying people who do qualify as social equity folks as employees.
Great.
And while I have the room, let me quickly answer, Maureen, that someone had asked earlier about, is about 100 cultivator processor licenses an accurate assessment? It could be. It sounds really vague when we're talking about the future with all this stuff, because it's statutorily really vague right now. The groups who are, in charge of this, specifically that IDFPR and Department of Ag, have a lot of power to affect when more licenses are available. And the legislature has been very active in this, which is great to see. So we could see them passing more stuff to change. So yeah, about 100 sounds about right, but they can speed that process up, or they can slow the process down based on the market, but also their own administrative abilities. Thanks, Maureen.
And Greg, will you remind us, based on your tour through the licenses that are in play? I believe there's 55 dispensary licenses currently and 20 cultivation licenses, and all the licenses to come through 2022. How does that remind us about how that compares? Is it will it be a saturated market? Is it a competitive market?
It appears that it will be a competitive market for a long time to come here. Illinois is in the top 5 per capita consumption of traditional market surveys. Sorry, I forgot to say that sooner. And what we're seeing here is a very measured approach, in which right now we're seeing a lot of demand and real bottleneck issues around being able to get it. being able to obtain adult use cannabis in the state, and that's probably going to continue for quite some time. So it'll be several years, if ever, before I, in my own guess here, would see anything that looks like a saturated or fully mature market.
Okay. Let me go back to some questions. So Margot, Michael, Greg, I invite you to unmute and get ready. We've got a comment question from William, and that's in the fact that many budgets are being reworked and the industry may be more cash strapped. And how do we really influence the marketing department and convince them that advertising is important? And Michael, looks like you want to take that question.
Sure. Look, I think it's a great question. Everyone in this industry, and I think outside of this industry, is looking at a very different economic climate than they anticipated 3 months ago, 4 months ago. That said, I think that what's important is there are going to be discussions that you have to have inside your company about how are we going to convince people to buy our product. Now, for some companies, it may be that marketing is less important. If you are selling a fungible commodity product, then you may not need to advertise as much, right? That it may be the price at retail is your selling point. For other people, there's a brand and a story that you're creating, and that's why people are going to buy your product. And it's my view, at least, that those are very painful cuts. People are going to perhaps reduce the spend. They'll have to spend smarter, but you still want to make sure that you're telling that story if you are selling anything that's not basically a commodity product where you're saying you could buy ours or you could buy the other guys, ours is cheaper. It remains very important to tell the story to the consumer within the framework of these regulations and the regulations of any other state that you're going to be selling in, of why yours, why your product.
Thanks, Michael. Let me invite Margot and Greg, if you're seeing a Q&A, a cue that resonates with you to share some answers with, I invite you to jump on in. I want to acknowledge Dean, thanks for going to your crystal ball. The days of puff, puff, pass, especially for smoking or vaping, and indeed the 2019 kind of vape crisis might be changing all of that. So your prediction is that people will socialize while medicated, but the sharing or the communal, I'll take a puff and pass it to you, may be on the downslide. And I hear you with that, especially with COVID. Related to that, there is another COVID question, and I think we are in for years of ripple effects with COVID, but Natalie is wondering if the coronavirus is going to have a permanent impact on Illinois cannabis industry, and if it were to, how would that impact us?
Hey, this is Greg. Well, we're really using the crystal ball on this one, right? Of course, if there's a vaccine available by December and it's very easy to produce, and we could see life returning to normal, by 2021. Obviously, social consumption folks, people are really interested in that, are gonna need to wait or be really creative. Like, I don't know if people have seen those greenhouses popping up for restaurants, but the cannabis industry is incredible with its new technology solutions and things like that. So never underestimate our industry's ability to make it past hurdles.
Yeah,
and the flip side is, oh, sorry, go ahead, Maureen.
Greg, you finish, then I'll add in my 2 cents.
Oh, my flip side is cannabis has been doing great at the retail level across the country. People are staying in more and need something to relax, purely in a non-medical context. This is a time that is good for the industry building. So overall, for demand, we could see years of it just going up and up as people are looking for ways to cut loose.
Yeah, I was going to add on to what you were saying there is what I think is thrilling for those of us that are in the cannabis industry, is that in the last couple of months, we are now designated primarily as an essential business. And I think that is an extraordinary push for our future and moving forward. EK Williams, I see your question about Illinois having yet created any state regulations regarding banking or taxation. And I bet Greg or Michael have something to share with that, especially about creating state regs.
Sure, I can start there, which is to say, yes, there's a tax structure. If you go into the laws that have been created, it adds it's also taxed. So there is certainly a tax that will be implemented on banking. I think it's worth pointing out that banking is in many ways a state level issue. There's only so many levers that you can pull at the state level, which is one reason why the Safe Banking Act, the federal legislation, is an NCIA piece of priority legislation. It's one reason why the NCIA lobbying team in DC does so much work on that issue. It's because federal regulators are going to need to be involved in a fix to a lot of these banking issues that have hampered the industry, and that's why SAFE is so important. And just for those who are wondering, passed out of the House, currently sitting in the Senate, and it's certainly something that's very important to the NCIA.
Okay, thanks, Michael. We're going to take one more question and then share our final thoughts. But we will indeed be sharing our contact information with each of you. So if there are other things we may be of service to you after this conversation, we're happy to. Myron has a question about restrictions for real estate locations. Can different counties and cities restrict where cannabis businesses may be located, and particularly for the non-retail locations? And Margot or Greg, if you'd like to take that.
I'm not sure if Margot is having issues or not continuing.
I'm here.
I'm happy to. Okay, great. Would you like me to take this, or you got it, Margot?
You could take it.
Okay. Yeah, so cities and counties through their zoning are able to affect where licenses can locate. This is a complicated interplay of state and local law. And from across the country, I can tell you that cities and counties don't always feel like following the state directive and have come up with some pretty creative ways to get around it. So they do have some abilities here, and though I don't know of a specific example, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some extra legal attempts being tried in other places. Some parts of Illinois have actually been very welcoming, which is great to see.
Yeah, it really depends state to state. Well, I'm going to give each of our panelists a moment to summarize their thoughts. Greg, would you kick it off for us?
Absolutely. So to circle back from where I started, has my cousin been to an adult use dispensary? No, because she has triplets at home and she's immunocompromised. What does that mean? You know, what's the big takeaway here today about we're just getting started in Illinois. There's enormous growth here, enormous opportunities, and we're only going to see this market mature in a way that seems very well thought out, with social equity being at the forefront. If you're ever interested in making more serious steps here, you can see my company's contact info here. We help some folks apply in these wave run rounds, and we'd love to help out anybody else pursue future rounds, and we can start working on that now. Thank you, everybody.
Greg. Margot?
Yes, for the 640 or so social equity applicants that applied for craft growing, transportation, and dispensary licenses, this is now an episode of Chopped. We don't know what's coming out the basket. The fate is really going to lie in two words, and that's capital readiness. For many of these companies, outliving the virus depends on a factor that's totally out of their control, and that's timing. With venture firms going into triage mode and changing the way that they invest, some of these startups may simply run out of runway just before the economy picks back up.
Thanks, Margot. Michael?
Thanks, Maureen. Illinois followed a new process to regulate its cannabis market, and that legislative process had a tangible impact on the form of legalization. From my vantage, it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out and what lessons other markets examining a potential legislative reform like New York, where we're headquartered, draw from it. The fact that reform occurred from within the government instead of from external grassroots activists is also a landmark accomplishment for the industry. I do think it's important that we take a moment to reflect on that very real progress we've made and all of the key players that have contributed to it.
All right. And thank you so much for joining us, everybody. My name is Maureen McNamara, founder of Cannabis Trainers. And just like Illinois has done a great job of expunging records for minor cannabis offenses, let's have our fingers crossed that we'll be able to move the industry forward positively. And that's certainly what we are committed to moving this industry forward with excellence, professionalism, and integrity. And as the chair emeritus for the State Regulations Committee, all of us as panelists today are part of that committee, and we are grateful for each of you. Many of you, most of you attending today are members of NCIA, and so we look forward to crossing paths with you virtually or as soon as safety permits, live. Here's to moving the industry forward with excellence. Thank you so much, everybody. And Brian, we'll throw it to you.
Wow, thank you so much, Maureen, and to all of our fantastic panelists joining us from the State Regulations Committee. We couldn't be more thrilled to have all of you lent your expertise to this panel, and I really think that we provided some really valuable insights to all of our attendees today. So let's give all these panelists a virtual round of applause by posting a quick thank you message, as I see a few of you are already doing inside the chat window, and let them know what the most important piece of information that you took away from today's presentation was. With that, I do want to close out today's sessions with a few upcoming announcements and a quick tease of a really important industry essential educational webinar that we have taking place later this month. So, in case you all missed it, we have decided to postpone our upcoming 7th annual Cannabis Business Summit and Expo from June until the end of September. This decision wasn't made lightly. However, NCIA's primary goal throughout the COVID-19 crisis has been protecting the health and safety of our community as well as the nation at large. So head to the cannabisbusinesssummit.com to sign up to receive all the exciting news that we're really excited to be releasing in the coming weeks, including a very special keynote speaker that we can't wait to tell you all about, and some really exciting developments for any product brand that's hoping to make a big splash on the expo floor this year. This will surely be a can't miss event and one we'll all desperately need on the other end of this crisis. So as soon as you're able to commit to traveling to an in-person trade show later this year, sign up to ensure you're at the epicenter of the cannabis industry this fall. Additionally, we also sadly had to postpone our 10th annual Cannabis Industry Lobby Days, which was set to take place later this month until this fall. However, along with that postponement, we've also made a number of structural changes to the event, which will provide a more all-inclusive experience to the NCIA members, volunteering their valuable time to our efforts. Admission, which is still just a nominal fee, will now cover the cost for all attendees to participate in our welcome reception, our breakfast training, and our new closing celebration in support of the NCIA Political Action Committee. We'll also be hosting the 2nd edition of our new VIP Day, which provides even more access and opportunities to participate in historic moments on Capitol Hill with your fellow cannabis industry leaders and our congressional champions. We're hoping to bring together all of those who have participated in the past, as well as hundreds of newcomers this year to celebrate the 10th anniversary of our organization and the historic progress we've all made together this past decade. So mark your calendars today, as the most impactful 2 days for the cannabis industry advocacy will now be held from September 15th, September 17th, and you can register today at thecannabisindustry.org/2020 lobby days. Have you or your business felt the pinch from a lack of exposure at in-person event these past few weeks? Well, you're not alone, and as always, NCIA is here to assist. I'm super excited to announce we just released a wealth of digital marketing sponsorship packages across all of our highly trafficked platform, including these NCIA Industry Essentials webinar series. As you can see there in the corner, special shout out to Illinois Equity Staffing once more for sponsoring today's content. Head to our website to learn more, and you can schedule a meeting with one of our biz dev teams remotely to discuss in more detail anytime. And last but not least, I would like to formally announce and invite all of you to attend the next 2 editions of our ever-expanding NCIA Industry Essentials educational webinar series. The Fireside Chat programs are an exclusive monthly opportunity for NCIA members to hear from our government relations team and guests about the latest developments in federal policy. And as and as Memorial Day nears, it's important to remember the reason for this holiday, our veterans. So please join us for a webinar focused on cannabis, health, and our armed services members. NCIA's government relations team will be joined by none other than the lead sponsors of the VA Medicinal Cannabis Research Act of 2019 and HR 1647, the Veterans Equal Access Act, Congressman Earl Blumenauer of Oregon, and Congressman Lou Correa of California. Our panel will also include the co-founders of the Veterans Cannabis Coalition, Eric Gopel and Bill Ferguson. This unique opportunity will allow you to hear from the lead sponsors of legislation designed to give our veterans the best quality of life possible, interact directly with members of Congress, and learn more about the prospects of these bills passing into law. As noted, this is an exclusive session open only to current NCIA members, so please ensure your membership is up to date, then head to NCIA's website to secure your spot before they're gone. Following that next month, we have another edition of our NCIA Committee Insights series, which is being hosted by our Scientific Advisory Committee. The talk will feature Tiffany Coleman, Director of Quality at Copper State Farms Management, and Paul Machowski of Dr. Paul's, presenting a session entitled Understanding Label Claims, which will explore how label claims came to be, what they look like in sister industries, and why label claims are important for cannabis products. This session is free for both NCIA members as well as non-members to attend. So if you haven't already, please head to NCIA's website to sign up today and invite as many of your colleagues who might be interested as well. Finally, thank you all so much for participating in another NCIA Industries Essentials educational webinar. As noted in the chat, all of you all will receive a PDF version of this presentation immediately upon completion of a short 5-question attendee survey that all of you all will be directed towards after this meeting wraps up. So please do stay on the lookout to your inbox and follow that link to give us some feedback on the session. Following completion of that survey, you all also will get exclusive access to a recording in video format that will be available within 72 hours of conclusion of the session and will be accessed via our website using the password #CannabisIsEssential. Our advocacy, educational, and community building work wouldn't be possible without the hard work and dedication of our nearly 2,000 NCIA member businesses. So thank them all for the support of their efforts over the past decade. If you're not already a member of NCIA, please do consider joining today by heading to www.thecannabisindustry.org/join after the conclusion of this webinar. A special thank you once again to our panelists, Maureen McNamara, Greg Huffaker, Michael Cooper, and Margot Bruner, and a special mention to our sponsor of today's Industry Essentials webinar, Illinois Equity Staffing. And with that, I hope you all enjoy a wonderful week, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week on the NCIA Industries Essentials session with Congressman Earl Blumenauer and Lou Correa. Thank you all so much.